everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and welcome back to another countdown. So I finished making my best and worst lists for all the Hey Arnold seasons, but there's still many episodes of the show I want to discuss, and some I've talked about before I'd like to discuss further. So what better place to start than looking at Hey Arnold's most ambitious works, its specials and its movies. These special episodes truly are some of the best things the show has to offer, and just how amazing and iconic some of them are really boosted the show's popularity and following, and I think more than anything else is the reason Hey Arnold is returned to and looked back on so fondly today. I've discussed many of the episodes before, and a lot of them landed really high on my best episodes lists, but there's more I want to say about most of them. They are just some of the most impressive and ambitious outings this show has to offer, and all of them are so different and tackle really interesting themes and topics, while exploring our great characters and world further. Well, at least most of them do that. Most of them are exceptional episodes because of these reasons, and some of them are my favorites from any show. Not all of them are S-tier episodes though, and the contrast between top and bottom of this list is pretty stark. And because there are so many amazing episodes, it made the top 9 or so really difficult to rank. Between all of this, I thought doing a specials ranking would be a great idea, and decided, because I haven't talked about them yet on this channel, this would be a good time to discuss the movies as well. They're very big things within the franchise that both have very different stories attached to them, and serve different purposes, and are both ones I have a lot of thoughts on. So I'm excited to talk about those as well. Also, it makes more sense to compare them to the specials than just the normal 11-minute episodes. And look, I know it's a little weird and unfair to compare any episodes of a TV show to full-length films, and I agree, so I'll just say I'm judging the films as movies on their own merits, and their placement on the list will come down to solely if I think they do a worse or better job being a Hey Arnold movie than any of the episodes do at being a Hey Arnold episode. But still, don't take their placement that seriously, at least in comparison to all the other rankings, because any way I try to compare them to everything else is still very arbitrary, and what's more important is my standalone thoughts on both films. Lastly, some segments will be much longer and shorter than others, because I have talked about some stuff before, maybe even multiple times. So in the case of ones I have spoken about, I'm gonna really try and focus on aspects I may have not mentioned or have talked about in as much depth, and really hone in on why the episodes landed where they did. Alright, with all that said, this is my biggest list and longest video yet, so we've got a lot to unpack today, so let's just get right into it. So I'll rip the band-aid off immediately and say this is the only special I consider to be bad, and is so much worse than everything else on this list. This is easily one of the worst in the show, and only didn't make my bottom 5 for season 5 because the competition was really brutal. So I didn't get to talk about it much in that video, but I did say I wanted to come back and discuss just how bad it is further, and here we are. Look, this episode has a lot of problems. The character and world writing is terrible. Every character here feels like the most boring and oversimplified versions of themselves. It makes me not interested in what's going on with any of these characters, and just feels like a hollow shell of our rich, interesting world we usually get to see. And that's not even getting into the fact that some of our characters are pretty out of character here. I don't believe the adventurous, fun Arnold would have no interest in April Fool's Day, and I don't believe Helga would be this malicious in this situation to Arnold, using the scheme to just get revenge on him and make him feel like crap. She does bad things to him during the show, but a lot of them either serve some specific end or in the moment things to keep up this weird image she's created. They are not planned out schemes to make him feel like shit. And stuff like this really sucks you out of whatever story this episode might have had going for it, which it doesn't really have any to begin with. I believe these elementary school students would enjoy and make a big deal out of April Fool's Day. But this episode just can't get the story out of it to justify making a big 20-minute special for this holiday. The story is really bare bones and uninteresting, but tries to feel really big and have high stakes like other specials, which it doesn't, and it's not like other specials. And that's what it tries to accomplish when it's not just kind of annoying because of the bad character writing. And while there is some interesting ideas here that they could have done more with, like a prank war between Arnold and Helga, they just don't. Arnold does one thing back to Helga, and then the rest of the episode is just Helga's scheme until Arnold figures out what's going on, which is all far less interesting. I think the final scene where Arnold tries to expose her is kind of fun and the only semi-fun part of the episode, but it's once again not written very well. All that is terrible, but I think the worst part of this episode, weirdly enough, is something the specials usually nail more than any other element, that being the pacing. This episode takes so long to really get going and is so slow. Every scene just feels so drawn out because once again, there just isn't much of a story to actually work with. And because of this, everything is so repetitive, especially the jokes. The episode is just not funny at all, and every joke the episode has, they just latch onto and repeat over and over again in the least entertaining way possible, whether it be Grandpa's pranks or Helga just making Arnold feel like crap every chance she gets. And it doesn't help that, as I said last time I talked about this episode, it's just a lot of stuff we have seen before. This story of Arnold having to help Helga, who is faking an injury, is essentially ripped from Bean. And that episode is so much better and more interesting than this one is. And there's also other elements too that feel like they're either ripped from other places or there are other episodes that do similar things a lot better. This episode is just such a chore to sit through because of how slow and repetitive it is, which once again is insane that I'm saying this about a Hey Arnold special, as you will see later from basically every other example on this list. So yeah, this episode is truly terrible and has so many major flaws that make it one of the show's worst. There are a few decent jokes and decent moments, and the animation in this one is a pretty good step up for the show, even if they don't really get to use it for much here, and I think they have a hard time kind of adjusting this new animation style to the world, which I think adds to the weird factor of this not really feeling like a Hey Arnold episode. And I will also say, because of these reasons, it sucks that this was one of the episodes that got that improved animation, because either way, the episode does look good. But with all that said, this is just truly a terrible episode that really sucks and is easily the worst special of the show. No competition. So this placement probably doesn't surprise anybody, and if it does, it was probably because this wasn't in last place. I know no one really looks back at this movie very fondly, and it doesn't have many defenders, with some calling this the worst thing from the Hey Arnold franchise. And while I would definitely not go that far, I also don't think this movie is very good. I had seen this movie one time before this, when I watched the show for the first time back when I was 13. And I'll be honest, I really liked it at the time, but never had any interest in going back to it, even on rewatch of the show, and as I heard more criticisms about it over the years, it made me really want to rewatch and talk about it on this channel. But I never really had a good opportunity until now. It's not a terrible movie by any means, but it is a pretty generic kids film, and a mediocre one at that. It doesn't feel much like a Hey Arnold movie, and they don't bank on or get much out of the great elements of the show. Hey Arnold is a show about kid-like experiences that can feel larger than life and other interesting experiences and people in this community. So a movie or special that has a story centered around the community getting torn apart and Arnold and friends coming together to try and stop it could be really stellar. But this movie doesn't get that much out of this idea, so instead, the movie throws a lot of other weird random ideas at the wall to fill the story out as Arnold tries to save his neighborhood, and very few of them work. The characters in this movie are just kind of bland. Our main characters vaguely represent their show counterparts, but are far less interesting and dynamic, especially Helga, sadly. Helga is actually really weird in this movie. She is a lot less interesting than she is in the show, obviously, but I think they kind of missed the mark on how her crush on Arnold actually works, and we get some weird scenes out of it, especially the one where she confesses her feelings to Arnold. It's just really strange, and should feel like a big moment, but it's just written so weirdly, and even ignoring that, this movie is so insular and not very good that it really doesn't mean anything anyways. Most of the other side characters aren't any more interesting than our main, if they really get anything to do in this movie at all, which most of them don't. And I really don't like any of the added characters. They're all just kinda lame, uninspired, and boring. Especially our main villain, Shaq, who seemed like the perfect villain for this movie at first, but is just a dull villain, and the twists around him and his motivation are very stupid and hard to take seriously. And I guess that kind of gets me into more of the story itself. I think the first stretch of this movie is alright. It does an okay job introducing us to some of the characters, and I like some of the attempts to save their neighborhood, even if it feels a little generic. But this brings me to another big problem of the movie, that they don't use any of this to really call back to things in the show. There are very few callbacks or references for fans of the show throughout the movie, and while it's not needed all the time for a movie like this, or a film that doesn't really expand on the world or our characters in any meaningful way, it would give a Hey Arnold fan more of a reason to engage and pay attention and justify why this is even a Hey Arnold movie in the first place, and not just a random generic kids film. A good example is when Arnold is going through the town and seeing the memories people made and are sad to lose the place they made them. And I actually like this scene, at least the moments he shares with Mr. Green. It's the one time in the movie they kind of do expand this world, but it would have been cool to use these scenes to actually reference all the experiences Arnold and friends have had in this neighborhood throughout the show. And they just don't. Some of the callbacks they do make are actually kinda awful though. It was cool to see Mr. Bailey again, but they really butcher his character here. I don't think he's the kind of dude who would sit idly by while a neighborhood is about to be torn down. It's bizarre. There are some other references to the show I do like though. Specifically all the scenes with Grandma, who talks about fighting authority in the show, and we actually get to see her fighting authority and escaping from prison, being super funny and in character. Outside of this stuff though, the rest of this movie just throws a couple weird ideas at the wall to give Arnold his grand adventure, and once again, it doesn't really work at all. all, and doesn't really feel in the spirit of what the show is. The spy mystery angle just doesn't work, and it turns this movie into a generic spy kids film. They get some kind of fun scenes and moments out of it, and I was interested enough in seeing these characters succeed, so I was kind of semi-interested in the story and to see where it would go, and there are some decent twists, but it's just not that fun or interesting. And well separated from this, we get some funny stuff, as I mentioned, with Grandma, and even some good moments with Phil. We also get the horrible Hulk scene with Big Bob, which is just so stupid and comes out of nowhere. Even with the spy stuff, there's just weird scenes like that to drag the movie out because there's not enough here to fill the runtime. Top all that off with an overblown, not very good climax involving them driving a bus back to the city, and you have the Hey Arnold movie. There's other stuff in this movie that also really doesn't work, like the art direction being kind of awful, and the pacing of this movie is all over the place and pretty bad as well. Once again though, I don't hate this movie by any means. I enjoyed parts of it, and really didn't hate or have a bad time watching the whole thing either. But I get why others do hate this, because it's just not much of a Hey Arnold movie. It feels like a generic kids movie through and through, and not a very good one. And while I get how this movie tried to be this grand finale, or at least big epic near the end of the show, about Arnold saving this neighborhood that has meant so much to him, and the people we have grown to know and care about, they once again just don't get much out of this because this movie is written really badly. And they do so much other shit that just isn't in the spirit of the show, and doesn't work either. So yeah, not the worst thing ever, but definitely far below a lot of the series and most of the other things on this list. So this is where the disclaimer at the beginning of the video comes into play. Look, I really enjoy this movie, and I think it's a lot better than the original, and there's some great things here, but as a movie overall, it has some big issues that bring it down. Let's actually start with the positives, because there are many things this movie does better than the first, and at its best, this movie is a wonderful love letter to the show. Firstly, the first 30 minutes or so of this movie are wonderful. It's really cool seeing this world slightly updated and modernized in ways that aren't intrusive. It's cool seeing the city more vibrant, and I like all the little background characters we see and more minor character references. I also really like the art direction in this movie, and a lot of the music is really good as well, using a good mix of old tracks from the show and new songs. And I gotta say, as someone who's grown attached to the soundtrack from pulling music for videos, when certain tracks played, I kinda geeked out. And yeah, the video they make about Arnold is also just wonderful. It's such an amazing love letter to the show. There's so many different references to so many different episodes and experiences, and cool showcases of what side characters are up to now. There's even references and updates to characters in episodes I don't like, which honestly I think makes this even better. It just truly encapsulates what the entirety of the show was. Beyond that too, I like the development on characters like Helga. She does things in this movie I couldn't see her doing in the show, like in the last movie, but the film actually does a good job showing that a little time has passed and that her perspective on this crush of hers has changed a little bit, which makes her actions feel in character and makes her dynamic with Arnold really interesting. And I should say, if nothing else, this movie goes about the Helga and Arnold dynamic stuff pretty well, and confirms some interesting things about Arnold's perception and perspective on Helga that I suspected throughout the entire show and was happy to see here were true. And it's cool after everything that's happened in the show between them to actually see them become great friends at the end of everything. Maybe even a couple, but that's kind of irrelevant. It's a satisfying ending to that aspect of the show, and we get some funny and cute moments out of it. I also like the different representations of all our old characters, and while not all of them get to do a lot, and some of the voice acting on particular characters is a little wonky, most of it is still great, and most characters get some funny and cool moments to shine. To talk about the actual jungle portion of this movie, it's cool we finally get a continuation of the cliffhanger from the journal, and Arnold going to find his parents. And overall, this is a fun action adventure film that keeps the core themes and interesting characters of the show to make it still feel like a Hey Arnold movie. Even with the crazy jungle adventure plot, we still have the through line of Arnold trying to find his parents and tracking them through places we saw them in the journal. And Arnold and Helga's evolving dynamic we also get to see. And I think the action adventure portions of this film outside of this are done really well, and the film is overall very exciting with a lot of good twists and turns. I also generally like the pacing for the most part too. There's also just a ton of funny moments and continuations of running gags in the show that really help complete this movie to truly make it feel like a love letter to the show and a continuation of it as well. So overall, I do like this one, but it does have some major problems, sadly, that bring it down. Firstly, the liar reveal stuff with Arnold and Lusombra is written pretty poorly, and I feel like it's just done to give that portion of the movie more conflict when it doesn't really need it. And they all kind of forgive Arnold immediately anyways, so it doesn't really matter. Lusombra himself as a villain, I also have mixed feelings on. I like how they introduce him here with him being disguised as Eduardo, and you're slowly able to tell that's probably not Eduardo, but they fake you out in a fun way. And I love how devious and threatening he can be at some points, but at other points he's just kind of a generic villain who's evil and wants power and money, and is no more interesting than that. But my biggest problem with this movie is how they go about the lore involving the green-eyed people and the sleeping sickness. It honestly just doesn't make a lot of sense. All the logic behind Arnold being the chosen one and what he needs to do to cure everyone from the sleeping sickness feels very contrived. To give an interesting explanation as to why Arnold's parents are gone and what happened to the green-eyed people, and to give Arnold this weird legend status. But I also don't like that. I feel like part of what makes Hey Arnold the show that it is, at least when it's good, is when Arnold is presented as an average kid who does remarkable things because he is a good person who tries his best. And I think making him this weird legend and savior kind of undermines that core of the show. And once again, the logic around why the cure is all just in this machine and it can only operate with this heart, and Arnold's the one who can use it, just doesn't make a lot of sense and isn't explored at all, and really sucks me out of the movie. And while strictly from a narrative perspective, Helga's locket working on the device makes sense because they establish Arnold needs a pure heart, but from a logical perspective, why would that machine just take anything that kind of fits in the opening? I know the answer is just magic and this legend and whatever, and you're not supposed to think about it that hard, but that's dumb. For a show as grounded as Hey Arnold, besides occasionally maybe there being a spectacular event that may or may not have happened, it just feels so weird that they just chalk all this weird things up to magical legend. And I also know the reason they make Arnold a legend here is because he's supposed to be kind of like one of those strange legends that Gerald tells in the show. But honestly, once again, I just don't think that works or is within the spirit of the show, because Arnold's role in all those episodes is to be the normal kid confronting those legends. So it's just really weird that they make him one here. And I know it was kind of hinted at in the journal with the volcano situation. I honestly like the take a lot more that was just a really cool moment of fate than it was actually something like deeply significant. Also, and honestly the most disappointing thing about this movie is that Arnold's parents are really boring here. They have no personality and aren't really anything like what we saw in the journal. It makes their reunion, while still sweet and earned, a lot less impactful. So overall, I get why people really love this movie, after many years of thinking it would never come out. And I want to reiterate, I like it as well, and do overall enjoy it. It's just got some big problems that keep me from being too hot on it. But I'm glad it finally came out, and Craig Bartlett got to make the true ending to the show he wanted to make. And it really does deliver a wonderful love letter to the series, and a good movie to boot. It's a lot better than the first movie, if nothing else for that reason. I just think the episodes I put above it are overall higher quality, even if there's nothing in some of them that I enjoy as much as the best things from this movie. So this is the only episode on the list. I have never talked about it all before, and it's because it's not actually that interesting. I know some people very strongly love this episode, which does kind of surprise me. But look, I do really like this episode. There's a lot to enjoy here. But in comparison to every special above it, this is just one of the least ambitious and special feeling, well, specials. But once again, I do really like this episode overall. It's fun seeing all these different characters' experiences at this beach, and we get a lot of great jokes out of it. There's some really funny stories in the episode and cute little character moments on the beach. Arnold's grandma going to a nude beach and the stuff that follows is so strange but hilarious. I also like the pairing of Susie and Miriam. You get some funny and interesting moments with them as well. I wish this episode would have actually used its premise to explore dynamics like this, and some of the little B-plots are significantly less funny than others, but hey, seeing Big Bob in horrible pain for most of the episode after getting sunburned is hilarious and really satisfying. In terms of the main story involving Arnold and Helga though, it's pretty solid. But there are a couple aspects in it that really bring it up overall and make the episode on whole really good. The idea of Arnold falling for this girl who's just using him for her own selfish ends, and Helga figures this out, but Arnold doesn't actually believe her because she has been such a jerk earlier in the episode, but then eventually Helga does expose her, is a generic story on paper. But there's some really good writing touches in this episode that make it work a lot. One example being that Helga is really mean to Arnold here, and gets outed for trying to ruin his day prior to her figuring out that Summer is the person she is. So it really doesn't feel forced that Arnold wouldn't believe her later when she tells him that. Also, this story's decision to focus more on Helga and learning a bit more about her character, along with seeing her schemes to get Summer to stop hanging out with Arnold, makes this one much more engaging. I really like how this episode shows that Helga treats Arnold more negatively when she feels like she has more to lose. Like when she doesn't think she is gonna see Arnold all summer after the last encounter at school, and when she thinks she might waste her whole trip with him by burning that bridge immediately, which she actually ends up doing. It makes her question more than ever why she acts the way she does, which is the only even remotely kind of complex part about the episode, but it's still pretty good. Also, as I said, her schemes are really fun to watch here and are entertaining, and it distracts from the kind of boring relationship between Arnold and Summer, because it's just kind of a background piece essential for the story to work. And the episode centers around Helga's schemes around that, which is good because I think the writing around Arnold is also kind of weird here. His views on the girls at his school feel a little out of character for him. I think he would describe Helga like that, but what other girls is he talking about? Rhonda, maybe? I don't know. Anyways, I also do really like Summer as a character and villain. She's so good at what she does and is so manipulative, which makes her dynamic with both Arnold and Helga fun and interesting. It's also just enjoyable to watch her go about the scheme and really sucker Arnold into helping her, and then watching Helga crash that scheme. There's just a lot of fun moments throughout, which lead to a good story, and I like the moment between Arnold and Helga near the end where he apologizes to her, and the sandcastle competition where they crash Summer's dreams further is also fun and very funny. So yeah, overall this is a really good episode. I don't know if it necessarily needed to be a special. You probably could have done an 11-minute episode and trimmed out some of the fat, but it being 22 minutes allows us to see some of the other characters on the beach and get more good jokes out of this concept and expand our main story at least a little bit. It's not a perfect episode. I definitely have some problems with it, and it just isn't anywhere near as good as what's coming up, but it's still just a really strong episode of the show and a good end to the inconsistent season 4. There are just much better episodes coming up. So this is one I don't really know what to think about ever. The last 2 times I watched it, I couldn't decide if it was a masterpiece or an absolute mess. And both times I've settled with, it's a really good episode with some critical problems. Let's get the positives out of the way first. As I mentioned last time, this episode has a lot to say about the legacy of artists and how artists who could have been totally disrespected when they died, after they are dead, get all this praise and respect that they probably should have gotten during their life. I also said covering this topic when it did was pretty ahead of its time. But I want to praise the episode for actually going further than I made it out to be with that idea and having some pretty sharp criticism of that idea in reality. While the episode shows that some people are sad by Dino's death and start appreciating him more right after he dies, a lot of people still drag his name through the mud, and he is not very respected at all. Not a lot of people really re-examine his legacy or care that much that he's dead, even after it's been a little while. People only start to get more interested when this impersonator shows up, and while people grow more of an appreciation for Dino in a sense and his older work, it's not in a way any artist would be happy with or proud of, as shown by Dino's reaction, as you could make the argument it's in poor taste, and people like and care more about this imposter than the actual Dino, because they like the idea of what Dino could have been. The impersonator is kinda Dino without the faults, without being human. I think this is an incredibly nuanced and complex look at the topic of an artist's supposed death. I know he doesn't actually die, but everyone thinks he does, so just roll with me here. The episode really shows that, yeah, the idea of an artist gaining more respect after they die is at least in some sense true and gross, because the artist doesn't get to share in that. But at the same time, the episode makes the super interesting point that if you ever think you or your art is guaranteed to be more appreciated after you're gone, that really just isn't the case. There's a chance that's actually not gonna happen, or happen in a way you wouldn't expect or ever want. Someone could steal your own legacy for personal gain, and you barely even get any more respect or appreciation because all anyone cares about is the new person puppeting your corpse in a way. And this could possibly lead to the destruction of what legacy you did have, and making you more forgotten. What I'm saying is once you pass, you have no say whatsoever over your legacy. And even if you don't have control over everything now, the episode's actual message out of all of this is that you'd rather be here trying to do right and solidify a legacy in life you're proud of rather than just hoping you'd be dignified after your death. Which is so complex for a kid's show, and is one of the most interesting and I feel like unique messages this show has ever provided. And the fact that we get to see Dino's thought process on his own plan of faking his death, and then getting to see what he actually thinks about the different things that happens is so interesting, and strengthens all these ideas by showing Dino isn't happy by what's happening with his legacy and image, and he does care about those things and making right by people way more than just being more appreciated and making money off of this scheme. This episode also has a really moving showcase of Arnold dealing with Dino's death. That's super powerful as well, and does a great job showing how impactful a weird death like this can be to a kid, and how awful some kids can be at comforting others going through difficult moments like this. The moment with Rhonda is so funny. She really tries to comfort Arnold, but it's just so uncomforting and blunt, it actually kills me. Especially with how moody and atmospheric and actually really powerful the rest of the scene is. And yeah, as I mentioned last time, the atmosphere is incredible in this one, and definitely up there for that category as far as episodes of the show are concerned, specials or otherwise, especially in the latter half of the show. So yeah, this episode has a lot to offer, but some of the individual story beats of this episode aren't very good. While it's interesting to see Dino's perspective on the fallout from his scheme, the scheme itself is still really awful and causes some people a lot of grief. In the episode, nor does Arnold really push back against this. The episode isn't really about him being wrong for doing this morally. And even at the end, while he apologizes for his actions, it's more about him apologizing for taking his own life for granted than tricking everyone into thinking he was dead. Because of this, the episode has a hard time making me actually care about Dino that much, or making me want to see him get his life and success back, and I don't buy that the people at the end would take him back that easily, or under the circumstances, think he was justified in punching the lookalike artist. Like, in all seriousness, I think he was justified, but I don't really understand why a lot of the people in the audience would. Also, there's just some dumb scenes and jokes in this episode that kind of kill the mood, like the boarders thinking Dino is a ghost. Also, the pacing in this episode, while really strong in places, is hit or miss overall. Some scenes definitely drag. So while this episode has an amount of issues that should probably make it land lower on this list, I just don't really care, because the highs of this thing are so incredibly high. And even if some story elements don't completely work, and there are other things that bring this episode down, I'm always just so interested in seeing where this episode is gonna go next, because of just how fascinating and nuanced it really is. Even with the ending being a little bit of a mess for reasons I stated earlier, it also exemplifies this nuanced look at the idea of an artist's death and the legacy of them all the same, which is why this episode is truly fantastic, but we have some more well-rounded stuff coming up. This one is so weird. I said in my Season 5 Best video that while I really like this one, I still wanted to like it more than I did. Well, watching it another time for this list, my opinion on it has actually changed, at least to an extent. And not only do I like it more, but I think I really understand what this episode truly has to offer. On top of that, I disagree with some of the points I made in the Best of Season 5 video. I actually really like the setup to this episode, and I think it's pretty clever. I love how through Helga's little monologue at the beginning, we get to see what she would want out of a relationship with Arnold and what she thinks of her current situation, and how she really understands, at least in some sense, what's keeping her from being with Arnold and what she could be doing differently to reshape her image and take opportunities given to her to get closer to Arnold, but because of her own nervousness and insecurities, can't bring herself to do either of these things, passing up on a great opportunity to spend some time with Arnold and instead just blowing him off and reaffirming her current image to him. I also think making Arnold as nervous as he is about the prospects of marrying Helga is an interesting and actually smart writing choice. It catches you off guard and might make you think he's a little out of character like I did in the past, but as the episode goes on and you see more of Arnold's dream, it starts to paint an interesting picture as to why he reacted the way he does. Arnold has a very complex view on Helga, which to an extent you're made aware of before this episode and is made very apparent with the ending of this one, but at the same time, Arnold struggles to really buy into some of his views because Helga does so much to be mean to him and present herself in the worst light possible. And the people closest to Arnold really reaffirm the idea that Helga is just as mean and awful as she presents herself. So while he might see some stuff from previous experiences that might make him think otherwise, it just doesn't make a lot of logical sense that she's not as mean as she seems to be from the get-go, and maybe more nuanced because everything and everyone else is telling him she's this awful person. So he overreacts at the prospect of having any sort of meaningful relationship with her more than you think he would, because I think he's kind of in denial about his true views on Helga, because he wants the easier assessment, the one that just makes more sense, to be true. And the whole point of Arnold's part of the story is seeing little things that prove that that easy assessment isn't true, no matter how much he kind of wants it to be, until we inevitably get to the ending where he comes to terms with his true thoughts on Helga. So in the context of this story, that setup does make a lot of sense and is necessary for the episode. To get to more of the actual dream portions of the episode, I made a comment in my Season 5 best list that we really didn't get to see much interesting stuff about our characters in these scenes, or examine them that much, which just isn't true. Through Arnold's dream, we get to see the situation for him get worse and worse, to a horrific extent, which shows just how bad he thinks this scenario could be. But once we get to that ending, we see that while he believes it could be this bad, there's definitely a chance it won't. If Helga actually reveals her true self and doesn't keep up this facade that Arnold can recognize, playing into the idea that Arnold wants the easy assessment of her to be true. But also through Arnold's story, we get to see a lot of interesting stuff on how Arnold views Helga's family, and how he kind of has a grasp of what's wrong with them and their distance/poor treatment of Helga, but also kind of sees Helga as a bit of a pampered princess at the same time. This is really fascinating and shows while Arnold recognizes some of the problems in this household and this family dynamic, he's still kind of a kid, beholden to his own biases, and there's other interesting little details like that throughout Arnold's story that showcase that he may have a more complex view of Helga and her life than it seems at first glance. And while Helga's story has less interesting details like this, it's still fascinating to see the kind of confident person Helga wants to become, and the role she wants Arnold to play in her life. It's a compelling dynamic. and through Helga's story, there are so many hilarious moments as well. I went in on the ending last time, so I won't do that again, but I will say it's great, and it wraps this episode on an interesting and curious note. So yeah, this episode is fantastic. Some of Helga's story still feels a little too fanficky for me, and in not a particularly fun or interesting way, at least compared to other parts of the episode, and this episode doesn't go as far with examining our characters or their relationship with each other as some of the others on the list, or even dealing with interesting topics or themes. But that's a pretty high bar because we're about to get into some amazing episodes. Okay, so the next 9 are all some of the best that this show has to offer, and easily some of the best of their respective seasons. So just because this is only number 9 doesn't mean this episode isn't truly exceptional. I called it the second best episode of season 4, which is an opinion I still 100% stand by. I'm not going to talk about this one for very long, because I stand by everything I said in my original review and don't have much to add. This is just one of, if not the most unique specials of the show. Not the most ambitious or complex or even hard-hitting, honestly, in my opinion, but definitely has an argument to be made for the most unique. I love what this episode has to say about veterans and how people, but especially the kids of veterans, see them. Both the stories we see are super interesting and have a lot to say about the people telling them, and I love the dynamics going on within the episode, leading to some really hard-hitting and powerful moments. I really only want to add 2 things. One, this really is just one of the funniest episodes of the show. I know I said that last time, but I just want to reiterate that Grandpa's story from start to finish is hilarious gold. Every little detail and joke just absolutely kills me. It's one of the funniest things the show has ever put out. And there is something really humorous as well at points that Arnold just does not believe Grandpa and gives some really funny responses to his antics that he adds to the story. And there's also something kind of funny in kind of a messed up way that Martin is trying to teach his son that to be an honored veteran, you don't need to be this big war hero who saw crazy situations. And then Phil tells a story about just that in the most over-the-top way possible. It's just so ridiculous. The other thing I want to mention, though, is I really like how nuanced Martin is here. His story and his relationship with his son is really compelling. Martin makes the decision to fight in Vietnam, which is one he struggled with, and his logic as to why he decided to go is one that many, including myself, would disagree with. And I like how the episode doesn't force you to agree with Martin's actions or his logic, but just shows that he was a struggling young man who made the decisions he did and stands by them, and tried to do the most good he could, and undeniably did do some good things in Vietnam, like saving a man's life, which has real-world effects on multiple lives that us and Gerald get to see firsthand. So he deserves respect, even if he wasn't some big war hero, quote-unquote, who saw crazy active combat in a just war. I think this is a really challenging portrayal of what it means to be a veteran, made even more so by Gerald's changing views on his father's situation. And I think this, above all else, is what pushes this to be one of the show's best. What kept it lower than many of its competitors is just that I personally get less out of this episode and have a desire to come back to it less than the others above it. That doesn't mean it isn't truly fantastic, but it just means I feel even more positively or am more deeply moved or deeply attached to what the next 8 episodes have to offer. But I would completely understand if someone connected to this episode more through their own life experiences would put this episode much higher, but I just don't have that attachment to this one. Still a very powerful and different special either way that deserves all the praise it gets. So I'm gonna keep this segment especially short, because I have talked about this episode multiple times, once pretty recently, and I don't really have a new angle to approach this one from at all. This episode just succeeds at everything it tries to do. It has a ridiculously fun story with some great twists, the atmosphere and pacing are perfect, and it uses the Halloween holiday well, and every character and story writing choice strengthens the overall experience so much, and it's just a blast from start to finish. There are very few episodes I enjoy watching more in the show, and while that was enough for it to brute force its way this high, it's just not quite as good as some of the episodes that are even more ambitious and impact me even more for that reason. So let's get into those. I know some people will disagree with me putting school play this high, but you know what? Fuck it, this is my list. Very few episodes of Hey Arnold speak to me in my childhood as much as this one does, and there aren't many I just get as much enjoyment out of watching quite like this one. I've referenced it before, but I took part in a lot of musical theater as a kid and teen. And as I grow older, I realize how much this episode connects with experiences I had then. This episode encapsulates pre-high school theater so well. And there's so many little things throughout this episode that represent so many elements of being in a school show like this. I especially love the representation of the different kinds of kids who participate or drop out of these kinds of shows at this age. They hit a lot of honest stereotypes of different kinds of people. This just really captures what it's like to be in a show like this, how the stakes feel really high and the director takes it so seriously, and there are circumstances around the show that also make you feel like you, as a child performer, should take this so very seriously, but in actuality, it's kind of just a dumb performance, and the kids don't really even understand the point or the deeper meaning of the show they're even performing. Neither does the director some of the time, as shown by Simmons thinking Romeo and Juliet is a romance when it's very obviously a tragedy. But what 9-year-old is gonna understand that anyways? And what 9-year-old should be putting on a romance show, even if it was a romance? It's just cool how the episode showcases all of this and gets many great jokes out of the messy process of trying to put the show together and all the different stages of the process, especially trying to memorize lines and the awkwardness of doing it with other people who aren't in the show, as shown by Mr. Wynn getting so into it to an hilarious extent. The performance itself is also a lot of fun, and it's cool we get to see some kids actually do really well and impress, and others just give the flattest performances ever because, yeah, they're 9, and that's how most kid performances are. The episode just once again really captures this whole experience, but if that's all this episode has to offer, I would like it, but it would definitely be much lower. Because it does go far with this aspect, but there are definitely places it could have gone even further to really encapsulate everything, which the episode doesn't do. It needs something else to really make it a complete experience. And what landed it this high was that I like Helga's story a lot, for 3 reasons. 1, I think this is my favorite scheme Helga pulls throughout the entire series. It's just so fun watching her knock down each of these girls one by one, getting them to drop out of the show so she can be the lead and kiss Arnold. All the ways she plays on these girls' distastes and fears is really fun and interesting to watch. It also leads to its own set of funny moments. Now, all this could be kinda dumb and boring, because Helga's motivation on paper is not sympathetic at all. Trying to get a kiss in a play stories are always dumb. But that's not what this is. Helga doesn't just want to kiss Arnold, she kind of wants to use this experience to hopefully make Arnold start asking questions and could maybe lead to a change in their dynamic and them eventually getting together. And whether she is naive or not to think this, her goals are still likable. And this is still something I could see a kid who's too afraid to tell another about their feelings would actually take part in and do. And the reason I think that is because from my own personal experiences, I can actually relate to this episode. When I was a really young teen, I was in a similar situation. While I didn't have a scripted stage kiss, on the last night of a show I was performing in, I decided to kiss the girl I did all my scenes with and was the first girl I ever had a crush on the cheek on stage, because I thought it would be a cool in-character moment, and being a shy kid, I thought it would lead to her being interested in why I took that action and would be a step forward into us maybe going out at some point. Well, I ended up losing interest in that girl. I did go through with that stage kiss, and the whole experience was my first really big one as a teenager, and one that has always stuck with me. And this strange episode weirdly encapsulates how I felt at the time. So I'm just so drawn to Helga's story, even now. I see my younger self in her, which is a weird feeling. The final reason why I actually really like the story a lot is on rewatch, I've come to realize the scene between Helga and Lila is one of the show's best. This is easily Lila's best appearance of the entire show, and the dynamic between the two girls here is so engaging to watch. Prior to this episode, you get the impression that Lila is smart, but not the most nuanced person or deepest thinker. So Helga thinks she can just walk in and try some of the other tricks she did on the previous girls. But you realize immediately that she's not gonna have the same problems the other girls had with this role, and is going to play Juliet. Until she reads the room and smartly figures out that Helga likes Arnold, and the control of the entire conversation completely shifts to her, and she spends the rest of the scene cleverly baiting Helga out to admit this fact, and even kind of enjoying the drama of it all. And the satisfaction of getting the secret out of her is kind of hilarious, but it's also fascinating to see this very clever and nuanced, but also very drama-interested side of Lila. And it shows that while these two girls are very different in many ways, they share some interesting similarities, and are much smarter and more complex thinkers than any others at their age, just in a different way. And they both have very different personas that would make you at first glance not assume that. It's really, really interesting, and I just absolutely love this scene. And once Helga does reveal her crush, the dynamic between them is so wonderfully weird. And I wish we would have gotten to see more of that in the future of the show, along with this interpretation of Lila. And it's so interesting watching Helga barge in thinking she can cleverly outsmart Lila into quitting, and then Lila actually stumps her and convinces her to reveal her crush, which is her deepest, darkest secret she has a hard time revealing to anyone, in the span of one scene. So yeah, this episode is truly wonderful. It's just an amazing experience that I really do get a lot out of and just enjoy watching so much. And it's only number 7 because, man, competition was very steep. So yeah, I still think this is the better Season 3 special, even with all the praise I gave to School Play. Unlike School Play though, I actually don't have much to add here, because my original review of this episode was really thorough, and it's truly an amazing special that I feel like gets lost in the shuffle of other specials, but is better than most and is really underrated. I guess what I will use this time to say is that the atmosphere is truly some of the best of the show, and brings to life every scene and captures the grim mood of these kids' crappy Thanksgiving. And it just makes this episode feel like a late November day to a crazy extent. I also just love that we really get to see Arnold and Helga hang out and level with each other here. It's not something we get to see much in the show, and their dynamic is just so interesting, especially because they really do have a lot they can connect over, and it's fascinating to see them do that here. And it is really what sets this episode apart from others and landed it so high on this list. Also, what sets it apart from other episodes of the show is its very bold messaging. It would have been easy for this episode to have just been like, buck up, other people have it worse than you, or a simple appreciate what you have message, or have these Thanksgivings just become good and show that the kids were overreacting. But no, in actuality, this episode demonstrates Simmons, Helga, and Arnold are all having bad Thanksgivings, and sometimes that's just what happens, and there's not much you can do about it, which is very true to life for any experience you have to share with a large group of people you're close with. But the messages and what Mr. Simmons leaves with Arnold and Helga is that if you care about all these people, all you can do is try to make these situations better. And what we see at the end with both Arnold and Helga is if you try to reach out with the people who care about you, most of the time they will listen. If you level with them, they will level with you. It may not solve everything, but it can make things better. I love how bold this message is while still being optimistic, and it's one of the most interesting that the show has to offer. It doesn't sugarcoat that sometimes kids are in crappy situations, but gives them an optimistic message that they can make things better without it being unrealistically positive. But even with all that said, this episode was just snubbed out of the top 5 by some ridiculously good episodes. There's a great case to make that The Journal is the best episode of the show. This episode has the grand feel and spectacle that I was hoping to get out of both movies and kind of got out of The Jungle movie. In a lot of ways, this is the show's magnum opus, a 44-minute epic that tells the remarkable story of who Arnold's parents were, how they met, the incredible adventures they went on together, the love they shared for their child, and then, with all that information being revealed, making their disappearance more acceptable in a sense for Arnold, but also more complicated and tragic. This is just one of the most exciting and enriching episodes of the entire show. It's a blast because of how fun all these adventures we get to see are, but it's enriching because Arnold's parents are such interesting people, and we get to see how much Arnold, seeing his parents through his own father's writing after never really getting to meet them, really means to him, which is so interesting after most of the show. Even after Parents' Day, there's still being a lot of mystery about his parents and if they really even cared about Arnold that much at all, which he struggles with at the beginning of this episode, so it's pretty wonderful to see that they definitely do, or at least did as far as we're made aware in this episode. This episode is just truly wonderful, and is so different from anything else in the show, but in a great way. I think it's cool, whether it was the original intention or not, to end the show itself on an episode exploring Arnold's parents, because questions around them were the biggest things that fans wanted answered, and I think even if this episode doesn't really focus on characters from majority of the show, it does show who Arnold is and the amazing person he could become through similarities he shares with his remarkable parents, and going all in on the unique dynamic with his grandparents, which leads to many amazing jokes on top of other great jokes in the main story. But at the same time, this very different episode does embody what the show is, for all the reasons I mentioned in my original review, but for another reason I thought of while writing this list. This show is about a bold, football-headed kid trying to do right by others who has a big imagination. So what better way to end a series about that kid through learning about his parents and all they did to help people through their jungle adventures that feel like they could be right out of a kid's imagination. One of the earliest imagination scenes we see from Arnold before that element of the show kind of gets removed is Arnold in a jungle. And with the 44 minutes this episode is given, it's able to get the most out of everything it tries to accomplish. So that, along with everything else, is why this is one of the most complete and incredible episodes of the show. That is just a spectacular watch I get so much out of. It truly is one of one, and I love it to pieces. And I definitely debated it landing even higher on this list. But this top 5 especially was so insanely strong, and there were just 4 others that focused on characters I cared about slightly more, and honestly tackle some of the most interesting themes and topics I've ever seen, and are some of my favorite episodes ever for that reason. So let's get into that. You know I'm splitting hairs to pick between these last 4 when this is only number 4. Arnold's Christmas is probably the most well-known and popular episode of the show, and for damn good reason. One of the best episodes I've ever seen, and easily the best Christmas episode of any show. The story is timeless, while still being set in a very particular time and place. It's paced amazingly well. The different conflicts and struggles our characters go through, and some of the character arcs are just so complex and moving. It has some of the best and most powerful scenes of television and can take you all over the emotional spectrum. It has so much to say about the meaning of Christmas, the idea of miracles, and what it truly means to believe in people and doing the right thing even if it isn't convenient, along with tackling themes of separation of families during war. And on top of all of that, having the best atmosphere of the show and encapsulating everything about the Christmas season perfectly. It truly is just a perfect episode in every way and serves every purpose it ever possibly could. It's really damn impressive. I've said that stuff already the last 2 times I've talked about this one, and everything I said in both those videos still stands as I continue to love and appreciate this episode more and more with every watch through. I don't really have anything to add because past everything I've already said on this episode, the multiple times I've talked about it, you really just need to experience the stone cold classic for yourself. I'll use what's ever left of this segment, though, to try in vain to justify why this is so low. Well, this one is truly something else, and is probably the best episode here. The final 3 just each do something that impacts me or moves me more emotionally, that makes it so I slightly get more out of them, but man, this one made such a great case for that number 1 spot and was really close. So as you probably were expecting, even with how close these last set of episodes are, my number 1 has been locked in that position for quite a long time, if you have seen some of my previous videos. And there was a bigger debate for would have taken the number 2 spot. And in what is the last surprise of the list, this landed at number 3, when previously I said that Parents' Day may have a chance to overthrow the episode I always had locked for that number 1 spot. But don't take this as an insult on this episode, or as an indication that it shrunk on me in any way, because this is still one of the hardest hitting and touching pieces of television I've ever seen. This story is so good. I love how this episode looks at every aspect of what makes Arnold the character we know, through this incredibly compelling story about him struggling with the absence of his parents, and the idea of parents in relation to his own circumstances. I love how the episode uses the Parents' Day event as an interesting way to start developing these feelings, and also interjects some comedy and funny moments super successfully into a complex and intense episode. Also, we get to learn a little about who Arnold's parents were, and the presentation and atmosphere of this episode is immaculate. Whether it be those jungle scenes showing Arnold's parents, capturing their life and the love they shared for each other in almost a magical way, and the different ways the Parents' Day theme is used throughout the episode, which is one of the best pieces of music of the show and really just hits me with the weight of Arnold's complicated situation every time I hear it. Whether he's feeling sadness or conflicting feelings about his parents' absence, or is inspired by the chance that he might see them again. But what above all else makes this episode one of the show's best is just the message that it represents to kids who may not be in a traditional family makeup. Arnold's grandparents are wonderful. The episode goes through so many lengths and killer little moments, showing not only how awesome they are, but also how much they deeply care for Arnold. And while he shares some similarities with who his biological parents are, it is his grandparents and how they raised him and propped him up when his parents left and he was at his lowest point that instilled in him the ideas of trying to be a good person who helps people, which made him into the helpful and kind, wonderful person he is today. It says to kids who may not be raised by both their biological parents that if they have a great guardian or guardians who care for them and is actually nice and cool, their relationship isn't any less meaningful or special than a kid with both their biological parents, and can even be better in some cases, as seen in contrast with Arnold's family versus Helga. I think it's cool that this episode gives a voice to children who may feel insecure about having a different family makeup than other kids around them, and these kids may be marginalized for this reason. It gives these kids empowerment and legitimization to their own life, which I think is just one of the most wonderful things this show has ever done. And it also gives kids hope. Hope that maybe a parent or relative that can't be with them right now for complicated reasons might come back and be part of their life. And it shows that there really isn't anything wrong for holding on to that hope. These two messages don't undermine each other. In fact, they actually strengthen one another. The second wouldn't work without the first. But attached together, it really creates something that could speak to and help a lot of kids, which is truly wonderful. This episode is just so fucking good. And honestly, the reason it's not number one is because the number two episode just hits me harder and connects with me personally more while being just as good. And my number one is just one of my absolute favorite episodes of television that this episode couldn't top. But damn, was this episode so close, because this one is just truly a marvel. Surprise! After years of talking about and establishing that this was my favorite episode of Hey Arnold and just one of my favorite episodes from any show, reaffirming that fact in my classic Nicktoons Valentine's Day list, I changed my mind while making this video and put it at number 2. The king has been dethroned. And before I talk about why the other episode that beat it out for the number 1 spot is great, I want to say that this episode is still one I absolutely love, and one that means a lot to me. I'm always just so taken aback by this one with how much it has to say about identity and how we present ourselves just in general and to certain people, and how it impacts others and makes them see us, or vice versa, and how your perception of someone can be totally challenged at any moment, and someone can be so different and more significant to you than you expect because people are just so complicated and always changing. And I also love how this episode tackles the idea of how different things could be if slight things about a person were changed in relation to these other ideas, which is something this show does in other episodes, but this is the only one that goes really far with it to the point where I really connect with this episode a lot. When I was a young teen, I connected to Arnold's story of having a crush he didn't know a lot about, and then when he did learn more about her, he found out she wasn't the person he wanted her to be, because all this mirrored my own experiences. And I was also really taken aback by the message that there could be someone right in front of you you don't really notice that you could actually have a meaningful relationship with, whether this be as friends or romantically, as I was growing into an adult and building more relationships and defining my own life. And I also connected with the really great way this show, but this episode above all else specifically, portrays how kids look at love, because I saw myself in these characters as a young teen. But now that I'm an adult, I connect with this episode less in some ways, obviously, but in other ways I connect to it more. I'm constantly thinking about how I present myself to others and the choices I make, and if my read on people is good or flawed, because it might be based on surface level things. And if I'm missing out on meaningful moments or relationships because of these things, which is exemplified a lot by my ADHD. I think these topics are what this episode and Arnold's dynamic with Ruth and Helga is about more than anything. And it's so interesting to see these ideas tackled through this really fun double date story that sets up these characters and some of these ideas to be explored perfectly with Arnold's realization of who Ruth actually is and Arnold's really interesting dynamic with Helga, who is hiding her identity, playing into elements I mentioned. The simple moments they share together are so fascinating and rich because of the different interesting elements at play of your perception of someone being challenged, even if you're not always aware of it or to what extent. I just have always loved how this is the first episode that really shows if things were slightly different or these two were able to show their true colors to each other for multiple reasons, they could be great friends and have a meaningful relationship. But tragically, they can't. That just can't happen because of circumstances around how Helga portrays herself normally and how Arnold perceives her from that. And this gripping narrative allows them to say all these interesting things about identity and our expectations for people and what it truly means for that to be challenged, while also exploring such an interesting character pairing and really showcasing how kids view romance in such a true-to-life but interesting way. The great pacing, great jokes, and amazing atmosphere round this all out to be one of the show's best and most significant episodes, being near the end of season 1. Arnold's Christmas and some other episodes of the first season proved the show has something to say, but I think this episode proved just how ambitious, meaningful, and complex this show can truly be, really giving it legs to stand on in that department as it moved forward into its future seasons, and showed that the show just continually has more to offer. There are other more specific reasons why this episode is amazing, involving how this episode more specifically explores Arnold and Helga's relationship outside of the themes I've mentioned here, but I've gushed about this episode multiple times before, so if you want additional thoughts, you can go to my Season 1 Best List Part 2 and my Classic Nicktoons Valentine's Day ranking. I just wanted to use this segment to demonstrate why I think, because of these meaningful ideas it addresses, is truly something special and has just meant a lot to me over the years. And I just want to lastly say, even if this episode stopped connecting with me completely in any way, it has just meant so much to me for so long that I would always prop it up, and this episode would just get so much appreciation from me that I would make it land really high on a list like this. It's just better than its competition, despite getting dethroned and slightly beat out by one more episode, which is... Helga on the Couch is one of the best character study episodes ever made, and definitely the best cartoon character study episode. I've never seen an episode of a cartoon thoroughly dissect a character, every aspect of their life, and why they are the person they are quite like this one. That is why this is the #1 episode, because there is nothing in the show that I get more out of than this thorough analysis and exploration of this amazing character, who is already the most interesting and best part of the show. Yes, this episode says a lot about mental health and how therapy can be a really good and useful thing through showing a great example of a great therapist who does a lot for their client and does a lot to show how therapy is stigmatized while destigmatizing it through showing all of that and just showing how amazing Dr. Bliss truly is, that she does help Helga work through her deep-seated problems, getting her to open up about her feelings towards Arnold, and puts her on a good track to feel better about herself and live a more healthy life in the future. And it also shows why good mental health care through this is important as well. And the episode, through pretty sad but powerful ways and scenes, addresses abandonment, neglect, and even abuse through Helga's story. There's so many truly sad and also funny moments that give us such insight into some of the horrible aspects of Helga's life, like the neglect and cold disinterest she gets from her parents at best, and them just not really knowing she even exists at worst. And how this makes her see the world through some really great artistic choices, like Helga's life being presented as a dumb sitcom, as she sees it as just one big stupid joke, until she really starts getting into her early childhood, making it more hard-hitting and shocking when you really get to see the tragedy of the neglect Helga faced as her parents propped up her sister and essentially acted like they didn't have another daughter, straining any relationship they could have, which is so important for a young kid developing at that age, and also putting Helga in horrible and dangerous situations. The entire sequence of her trying to get her parents' attention and then walking to school alone in this big dangerous city, and then finally being shown some compassion and kindness from Arnold when she finally gets to school, is just the best scene of the show, because it perfectly encapsulates, without spelling anything out, why Helga is the person she is. Along with the next scene in attachment to that, where we see where her aggressive tendencies come from, and this is what makes the episode the best, because it tackles all these interesting topics that many kids in neglectful or abusive households face, and it does it with such depth and brutal detail while not pulling any punches. Even though it is subtle and clever about how it showcases certain things that it probably couldn't have gotten away with otherwise, it still uses all these elements to paint a full and complex picture of who Helga is and why she developed this crush on Arnold, because he was the only person who ever really reached out to her and acknowledged that she exists, and how, because she's so afraid of opening up, because she's afraid he won't feel the same way, taking that one good thing and feeling in her life away from her, she decides to cover her feelings up, and who she really is, using stuff she has seen from her father, which is one of those things that they imply and is more subtle, and they showcase that in a very clever way. It's all just wow, I don't even really know what to say. It's just heavy stuff, man. It just shows a girl dealing with so much and who suffers from some serious mental health problems because of it, and through showing her dynamic with everyone around her and addressing all the things I mentioned, showing why she's in the spot she is in, but through the last conversation she has with Dr. Bliss, shows not all of her weird habits and behaviors are necessarily bad. She can just try to get better at some things, and as she grows, just needs to understand she's never gonna have a meaningful relationship with Arnold if she doesn't share her feelings and continues to push him away. But there's nothing wrong with not telling him yet. After everything we have seen in this episode, it's cool to see her get some good advice and be put on the right path, and through that and every other scene with Dr. Bliss, getting her to open up and help her once again shows how great therapy can be. And it shows for kids who may be going through similar experiences as Helga through not having a great home life, that if you are dealing with mental health problems because of it, there are outlets that can help you. You are not doomed to be miserable because of it, no matter how much you feel like you are, which I think is a really powerful and great message. But at the same time, this ending makes Helga an even more rich and more complex character to be expanded on even further. This is just such a one-of-a-kind and meaningful experience that I just love everything about, and is the most enriching experience of the entire show. I put this at number 1 because it is just truly and honestly the best episode of the show, and you really just need to get that full experience of seeing every angle of Helga's life to understand why this episode is just such an interesting masterpiece that has so much to say. And the best episode looking so deeply into the best character this show has to offer, while really having a lot of the best elements of the show to boot, like amazing pacing, amazing atmosphere, tackling so many interesting subjects that can connect with a lot of kids, and just having some of the most interesting characters any cartoon has to offer, making this episode a masterclass from the show and the best Hey Arnold special. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching. If you stuck around for the entire video, I really appreciate it. This was a project I was super passionate about and put a lot of time and effort into putting together, so it'd be really awesome if you could leave this video a like and subscribe for more content similar to this in the future. Also, leave me a comment down below telling me your own ranking and what you thought of mine. In the next video, we'll be moving away from Hey Arnold to a show that's kinda its spiritual successor. That being 2 list videos about the top 5 worst and best episodes for As Told by Ginger Season 1. So stay tuned for that. But until then, this is Chocolate Guy, signing off.